All right, Canteeners, welcome to another episode 86 of Culper's Canteen Cup. This is going to be a short and quick one, pretty fast and furious, which my wife has heard several times throughout the couple decades of our marriage. But real quick, before we get into it, want to give a shout out to Carlton Zeus. I know he's got a new video out there. Obviously, we use his music as our intro music. So check him out on Apple Music or www.carltonzeus.com. So I want to throw it over to Josh real quick. Obviously the big news right now, we felt like we had to hop in here. You notice there's only two of us. So today we're going to be C2. Luke is out there again, violating the rights of maybe some Americans, some Guatemalans, some Hondurans, or whoever else he can find. But we felt that especially what was going on with the leaked memo, I think it was Justice Alito referencing Roe versus Wade and potentially the way the Supreme Court is going to rule on that we kind of wanted to get in front of this thing. As opposed to waiting 2-3 weeks after this thing has come out and Portland and Seattle and Chicago and half of DC have burned. So let me throw it to Josh real quick. I know he's got a couple updates first before we hop into it, and then we'll let you know what's on our mind.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick, yeah, Luke wanted to be here, but he's busy running the Constitution through a shredder right now, crosscut quarter inch. So he'll hopefully he'll be back on the next episode, ready to tell you about the violations of posse comitatus and all the good work he's doing down there. So hey, real quick, so I spent the weekend back up in Maryland, real quick. One of our old organizations that Roger, Luke, and I were all in. There was two events. One, a good friend of ours was retiring. Probably, well, present company excluded, of course. The best sergeant major that I've ever served with. I give NCOs a lot of grief. Being a former warrant officer, and they deserve a lot of grief. But all joking aside, Jeremy, man, I was honored to be there. Honored to be able to call you a friend, and congratulations on an exemplary career. You did it the right way, and you made it to the finish line. And I know you're gonna go kick ass in what you do next. And then the other event was, our old organization all got together for the first reunion ever in the history of the organization, which is something that we talked about, while we were there, trying to make sure that the alumni, stayed in touch with you, because a lot of folks went on to do a lot of great things and are, go on, and they have a lot of, there's a lot of folks in a lot of very senior positions across, the various industries in the country. And a lot of people turned out to be very successful. And I was like, that's a very powerful thing, especially in today's world. You're only as your worth is, a lot of times tied to your network. You can have lesser skills, but what network are you bringing, right? Because nowadays that's a very marketable thing. So it was really good to see some of the old guys haven't seen in a very long time. It's really interesting, and Roger can attest to this too. It's like the bonds you build while you're in the military. It doesn't matter how long it takes before you see somebody again. It's almost like you pick up right where you left off. You spend a lot of time in adverse conditions and in adverse situations, and those bonds, they're for a lifetime. And so I had my first listener interaction of folks that I didn't know listen. So big shout out. Yeah. It was funny. It was like, hey man, cause I'd role played for some, an exercise, and a couple of the guys, one of the guys was like, hey, I remember, you're my role player and blah, blah. We got talking. And then he was like, oh yeah, by the way, man, I listened to you, Luke, and Roger, and I was waiting for the, you guys really suck. You're idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. Blah, blah. He was like, man, I love what I love what you guys are doing. Really enjoy, the banner back and forth and stuff. So Miles, I appreciate it. Shout out to you, shout out to Griff, for listening as well. And a shout out to John, who's getting ready to enter that retirement process. And eventually find himself on the other side of it in the civilian world. So he was one of our old commanders. So definite shout out to those three. Shout out to everybody that that I got to reconnect with a little bit. Um, so yeah, so the big news, Roger, obviously, right before I went to right before I went to bed last night, old man early, I started seeing uh, this stuff come across my social media feed, and I was like, "What is going on?" I was like, "Oh my god, the Supreme Court just overturned Roe v. Wade," and so I pulled it up, started looking into it, and no, they had not overturned Roe v. Wade officially. It was a Supreme Court staffer or justice leaked the draft majority opinion, who apparently was authored by Sam Alito, and it had been leaked, which is the first in Supreme Court history. For the first time ever, a draft opinion has been leaked, and of course, with it being Roe v. Wade, abortion, it set social media. It was like it was like a million Hiroshima bombs going off all at one time, and it has spiraled the left into a dimension of pissed off I don't think they've ever been in before in their life. Um, well, not since we freed the slaves, from the Democrats, maybe, but so you know, so there's really for me, and I'm going to kick it over to you. I want to get your thoughts on the implications of the leak. Right, what is the significance of that? And I'm going to talk for another minute real quick, but right, I look at, for me personally, there's two dimensions of this. There is the decision, and then there is the significance of the leak and what that does to the court, to the really, I would say, even to the entire judicial branch. Where does that leave it? So I'll throw it over to you. I like to, kind of get your thoughts on what do you feel the implications are for the judicial branch as a whole, Supreme Court specifically, on this being leaked, and what should they do right now, and how does the judicial branch move forward while maintaining that level of impartiality that they should be.
So let me put this up front. They're not going to do anything. I mean, they may find the leaker, they may find the staffer and this and that. And there's been talks of disbarring whoever the clerk is and yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, they're not going to do anything. I'll just tell you that up front. There'll be a lot of hullabaloo and some stuff in the news. But, you bring up a very good point. Right now, and there really are separate issues, right? There's the morality of abortion itself, which we don't get into. That's a different argument that you can have, whether you have a religious view on it, just a whole human being, there's the morality piece by itself is a separate argument that will never be solved. I mean, everybody's going to have different opinions. Everybody's got different morals, what have you. There's the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade, which I'll tell you this, and we say Roe v. Wade because that's the one that's the most popular. But we also throw in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and we'll tell you a little bit about the difference between those two, or what Casey did on top of Roe v. Wade. But there's the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade, which if you listen to Culper's Canteen Cup, I forget what episode it was, about a year and a half ago, we've seen this coming since the beginning. I mean, and I know our listeners and our viewers have as well. I mean, when I watch Fox News and I listen to a little bit of CNN and MSNBC, they're all like shocked. Something we never thought would happen. Roe v. Wade. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, if you didn't see this, then you probably shouldn't be on the news. I mean, we've been calling this thing for 18 months, and well before we even started this podcast, we knew this thing was going to be challenged. The way the Supreme Court works, and much like we've discussed in the past, is that they can't just randomly say, hey, we're going to rule on this. You have to have the right case that's going to challenge some precedent or some constitutional, amendment or law or what have you, and it's got to work its way up through the court. So you can't just say, hey, we're just going to take a relook at this thing. So we had to wait for the right one. And then as we saw with Texas and Mississippi, I think this was the Mississippi one that got challenged. It was the right case, right? And when you go back, and we'll get into some of the legal piece of it later, but back to your original question, when you look at what it does to the justice system, and it's actually funny. One, when you talk about the meltdown of the left, because I don't know if Elon Musk has had anything to do with it or whatever, but since Elon Musk bought out or had his offer accepted to buy out Twitter, I mean, it's just been nothing but meltdowns on the left. And what's funny is, if I recall correctly, it was Justice Sotomayor who said, "Well, I feel the Supreme Court is becoming, a political process." And now you're seeing, yeah, it actually is, and not necessarily by the justices themselves, but by the clerks and the staffers, and who knows, maybe by a justice themselves. I don't know. We have no idea who's involved. You could have a justice themselves that or themselves that is not happy with the majority ruling that's going to come out. That says, hey, maybe this thing needs to make its way out to the media, to the public, to either one cause pressure, or you've got midterms coming up, and we can get into that as well. As is this going to be some spark or some flame for the left going into the midterms? One thing with drafts, like Josh said, from what I can tell and what I've read and listened to, it's never been leaked before. That's kind of one of the things that was like, hey, above and beyond everything, the Supreme Court was above politics, right? It's apolitical, and justices could sit there and they could talk back and forth. They can exchange ideas. I mean, they talk about all the time with, RBG, playing chess, and there was a free expression of ideas and opinions and thought processes. And sometimes these opinions go through several drafts. They may go through 3, 4, 5, 6 drafts, because as they continue to work it and continue to work it and continue to refine it and continue to have other justices throw input on there, ideas change or you refine things. And part of the releasing of this thing, I mean, the leak is huge. I mean, one, they should prosecute him. It's interesting listening to Jonathan Turley, because he's like, yeah, it's gonna be kind of hard. I mean, really, the only thing you can really, prosecute somebody on would be perjury, because or making false official statement, because eventually what's going to happen is, I think it's going to go to the FBI, and the FBI is going to start knocking on doors, making phone calls and doing interviews, and the hard question is going to be asked, right? Did you leak this information? And so some individual, and I'm taking away from what he said today on TV, but some individual is going to have to make that decision and say, either lie about it, right, which then, okay, boom, you've got them, or just come out in the open. My opinion is nothing's going to happen to the individual, because this has been the MO of the left lately. I mean, when you look at the one lady, I forget her name. I don't even want to say her name on here because I don't give her any more publicity than what she's already getting. But when a decision comes down, when an activity, an action, a law, or whatever, it's the left's MO to just dox somebody, just dox them, just release it, just leak it, just whatever. And then they'll call it whatever they want to. They'll call it whistleblower, or, what, for the protection of women, not just in this country, but worldwide. We have to do this, and the ends justify the means. And that's been the Democratic playbook. Yeah, Taylor Renz. I didn't want to say her name, and Josh typed in there, so whatever. That's been the playbook of the left. The ends justify the means. But the problem with this whole thing is, and I'll get your opinion, or I want your opinion on this, Josh, is one, you're going to see some gaslighting going on. It's already happening. Nobody's outlawed abortion. They're obviously going to have some implications, down at the state level and this and that. But, at the end of the day, does it really change a whole lot? I mean, guess what? California is going to maintain what they have, right? I even read today where they're going to have a bill where they will pay for people to come across and have abortions there or whatever. But what you're going to see is the left to start, they're going to start conflating issues just like they do with everything else. And there's going to be a lot of gaslighting going on. It's like, hey, there's a lot of stuff here that you guys are wrapping into one thing, and it really doesn't change the dynamic of anything. So I guess, throwing it back to you with your question, one, the leak should be the issue, right? The sanctity of the Supreme Court, the sanctity of the discussions that go on there. Again, that free expression of ideas without the politics. Hearing Chuck Schumer on there today, I mean, they attack these folks, and they've been doing it. They've been calling out Supreme Court justices, talking about packing the court and this and that. So do you think they find out who actually leaked it? And then do you think anything's actually going to happen to the individual? I mean, we know the left will hold that individual up, man or woman, as a hero or whatever, but do you actually think anything's going to happen to that individual?
So no, I don't think anything's going to happen to that individual. Not while Democrats control Congress, because, like you said, they're going to be championed, as a hero of the left, much like Hassan was originally championed as a hero of the left. When he released information, damning to the right, and the same thing with Snowden. He was, championed by the left. And think what you want about Assange, but Snowden was nothing more than a traitor.
Yep,
He was
spot on.
he was nothing more than a traitor, but he was championed by the left. So as far as the leaker goes, I read something early this morning over coffee, to where the Politico reporter, and I don't have the names in front of me, I apologize, but the Politico reporter that broke the story and released what people are, people, it has now been confirmed by the Supreme Court that it was Alito who wrote the majority opinion, released his draft, had quoted a a current clerk who clerks for Sotomayor, in a 2017 piece on something, it didn't have to do with what was going on, within the Supreme Court at the time, but it was the same individual. So you have a clerk for Sotomayor who has been quoted by this very same reporter before, and now this same reporter, releases a draft of, the majority opinion, which will ultimately overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, that's what we call an indicator. That's probably where I would start. Start my investigation. So Roberts did call in. He requested the FBI investigate the leak and the leaker, which means that we'll probably never know the truth. We'll never know, what really happened now that the G men are involved. It'll just get memory hold as much as possible. So you talk about, I won't get into the morality of abortion here either. I have my own opinions, but the most important thing here isn't what I believe, as far as the morality goes, but it's like you mentioned, this is about the Constitution. And, even Justice Ginsburg, back, I forget what year it was, but, and she even made the comment multiple times on Roe v. Wade, and I quote, doctrinal limbs too swiftly shaped may prove unstable. So, the main argument in Roe v. Wade, and even Ginsburg criticized this argument and said that it wasn't a good argument, was about the patient's right, the woman's right of privacy with her doctor, and not a violation of equal protection is guaranteed by the Constitution. So the whole argument and the premise of Roe v. Wade was about the right to privacy between a woman and her doctor. And I'm gonna just, when it all gets boiled down, when you go look at the 10th Amendment, right? The 10th Amendment is very clear. Those rights not expressly stated, expressly outlined in the Constitution, those powers belong to the states and ultimately the voters of those states. So I don't care how much you argue it, abortion is not in the United States Constitution. It is not guaranteed. It is not enumerated. It's not there. So that belongs to the states. And a lot of folks, on social media, and I made this comment to you guys earlier, man, there's a lot of people who don't understand how federalism works, because they are very much of the mindset. They're like, well, the Supreme Court has now banned abortion, if they overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. What the Supreme Court is actually doing is the Supreme Court is merely saying that Roe v. Wade was a terrible decision. It should not have been decided in the first place. It shouldn't even have been entertained by the Supreme Court. They are saying the states and ultimately the voters in those states should have the final say, and not all 50 states have to be in alignment and lockstep with what one state decides. And I find that just Well, I don't find it mind-boggling actually that a bunch of people don't know. I don't find it mind-boggling that a bunch of people have not bothered to sit down to read just a couple of simple, just the Constitution itself and the Bill of Rights. Um, so you're right. So this all stems from the Mississippi case, the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case, and we called it. I forget which episode it was, but we talked about it when that case came before the Supreme Court. Because I remember all of us kind of independently on our, we were listening to the oral arguments in that case, and we were, messaging back and forth, about what was going on and what they were saying, and listening to it. Even Roberts, questioned uh, the Jackson Women's Health Organization on the constitutionality of it, and they kept trying to go back. They kept trying to go back to the morality of it, and they kept quoting. And maybe you can kind of break down, Roe v. Wade and Casey, Planned Parenthood, how it played out, and some of the differences and similarities. But even Roberts, who is, he's very unpredictable. Um, Even Roberts was questioning their constitutionality. It was almost like Robert. You know how when you're role playing and you're trying to teach through the role, like you're trying to, hey, this is what you should be focused on. This is what you need to ask. This is you should probably think of. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Roberts, his line of questioning was, you could read, you could see what he was doing, and it was like you're arguing about morality, and you're arguing about the Bible and the Torah and stuff like that. And it was one of those things. It was like they were arguing from a position of authority. When you argue from, let's say the Bible, for instance, you're arguing from a position of authority, which is a fool's errand, because the person you're talking to may not subscribe to the authority to which you're arguing with. Right. If I don't believe in the Bible, you can quote the Bible all day long, but I don't believe in that. What I do believe in is the Constitution of the United States, because it is there. I can see it, I can touch it, I can read it, and that is what our laws are built upon. Um, and so that you could tell then you're like, this is not going to go well, for the left. And this is, rightfully so. Like, this is going to lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade and send the question of abortion back to the states, which I think where it belongs. Um, so maybe you can break down, kind of the Roe v. Wade and Casey, decisions, and some of the nuances and highlights of those to kind of help better frame this for folks who might not be as spun up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to preface this, this is where they get it wrong. Like Josh just said, oh, abortion's illegal. This, you realize that by Roe v. Wade being overturned and this being pushed back down to the states, theoretically, okay, we get it. It won't happen. But every state could say, hey, abortion all the way up to birth. They could do that. That's what this does, right? But you won't hear that from the left, because they're just saying, oh, you're taking away women's rights. No, you're not. Okay. It leaves it up to the state. And again, just like everything else back with COVID, it's funny because you have the hypocrisy, right? My body, my choice. Well, that wasn't the case with the vaccine. That wasn't the case with wearing the mask. So when is it your body, your choice, my body, your choice, my body, my choice? Whose choice is it? Whose body? And one of the things I think the left and the Democrats don't do a good job of, which I'll get into here with some of these rulings, is discuss or dismiss the point of viability. When does that child, unborn child, have rights? And they can't come out, obviously, for PR reasons and just say never. They just won't say it directly, never, not until they're born. Because I think there's some wackos on the left that have thrown out even after they're born, like 30 minutes. Try to throw that out there. The mom may decide right then that they don't want the child or whatever. But they haven't been able to overcome that, and they don't even address it, which is one of the challenges of the left, the progressives, and the Democrats. But on to Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. So Roe v. Wade basically said that states cannot create laws that are overly restrictive on abortions, right? So what they did was they basically drew out and said, hey, okay, we've got 3 trimesters. So the first trimester, the state can't interfere at all. There's basically no laws that the state can make, and this is Roe v. Wade, to prevent a woman from going out and having an abortion. And then they kind of loosened it up a little bit. Said, okay, well, the second trimester, the state can kind of have some prohibitions there. They can kind of create some laws, but they didn't really break down that second trimester. And these are all artificial, right? These are all just like, oh, okay, we have 3 trimesters, and these are the dates that we're picking. And then when it gets down to your final trimester, Roe v. Wade basically says, okay, now the state can jump in and say, okay, it's got to be the health of the mom or the baby or what have you. Take that a step farther, a couple decades later, you have Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which actually got rid of the trimesters and said, okay, viability. Okay. And viability is the point where the child can survive on their own without the mother. And so at that point, because that's kind of where the right was pushing, through rhetoric and through a lot of PR and media, is like, okay, so at what point is this a person? At what point does this baby unborn child have a right or have rights? And so at that point, you have to determine, okay, or you don't have to. This is what they did, was say, well, the unborn child has protections and has rights the minute that the unborn child is viable, which means that they can live on their own without the mother, without the host. So that's what Planned Parenthood versus Casey did. With this ruling here, they're just saying, and I'll kind of get into some of the weeds here. They're just saying that, hey, federal government's staying out of this. We're going to kick it to the states, which I'm a fan of. Again, no matter how this thing shakes out, I'm a fan of states' rights. I'm a fan of the voters who have direct votes to elect their representatives to make these laws, because it's not going to ban abortions across the country. If people want to go to California, they want to go to New York, they're going to do that. If you're in some places like Alabama, Texas, Mississippi, and you're probably going to be able to draw the line, right? Red and blue, where you can get them and where you can't. And both of us, it was funny because Josh is spot on. I forgot it until he brought it up when we were texting, because we actually listened to the Supreme Court audio, and they were talking about the cost and this and that. And, the conservative lawyers, they just destroyed the Democratic lawyers, where they're basically, oh, you want to talk about cost and this and that? Well, here's the cost of an abortion, versus the cost of prophylactics and all this other stuff. But going specifically talking about Roe v. Wade, because Planned Parenthood versus Casey basically just brings in the viability piece to Roe v. Wade. Some of this is into the weeds, but this is kind of give you some of the thought processes to this, because we're not prognosticators as much as we want to believe that we are. But 30 seconds of Googling will tell you this. So, and I'll read some of this word for word, but among the legal scholars who have roundly criticized the court's ruling in Roe as not being grounded in the U.S. Constitution are the following. And the whole point of this is this. This is not a Culper'sCanteenCup thing. This is not a Mitch McConnell thing. This is not a Republican thing. Just about anybody who has any standing, left, right, progressive, Democrat, or Republican, that has taken a look at this, and I actually went through a lot of the references today, say, yeah, if this thing ever gets challenged, man, we're screwed. Roe v. Wade's getting chucked out, which is a reason why a lot of this stuff hasn't come to the courts over the last several years. They knew it was going to be thrown out, and they knew it was going to be thrown out based on the constitutionality, because there's a broad implication of the 14th Amendment. Obviously you take away some of the 10th Amendment rights or what have you, but I won't go through every one of these. But some of the folks who criticize this, you had 6 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court that were not simultaneously seated, but White, Rehnquist, Scalia, Thomas, Kennedy, O'Connor, not to count Alito, and then possibly the 4 or 5 others that are on there right now. Virtually every recognized constitutional scholar who has published a book or article on Roe, including many like Harvard's Lawrence Tribe, who supported Roe's outcome on other grounds. Yale Law School professor John Hart Ely actually came out and said Roe v. Wade is bad because it's bad constitutional law. And then Edward Lazarus, former law clerk to Roe's author, all right, Justice Blackmun, who writes, as a matter of constitutional interpretation and judicial method, Roe borders on the indefensible. I say this as someone utterly committed to the right to choose, as someone who believes such a right is grounding elsewhere in the Constitution, instead of where Roe placed it. Now, they fail to go into it and say, okay, well, then where did Roe, if Roe misplaced it, where else do you find this in the Constitution? Of course, they're never asked to address that. So these things that I'm coming up with and reading from here, I mean, these aren't just from like conservative talking points. I mean, even the folks on the left who helped author this thing, or clerked the judge who actually authored this thing, I was like, yeah, man, this is all bad. And these are just the major points. So one, They say the court's decision in Roe v. Wade exceeded its constitutional authority. So, quick snippet: under the legal system established by the U.S. Constitution, the power to make laws is vested in Congress, as we all know, and retained by state legislatures. It's not the role of the Supreme Court to substitute the policy preferences of its members, yada, yada, yada. So, what it's basically saying is that, guess what? Hey, Congress, if you wanted a law on this thing, you probably should have created one. Okay. Hey, legislate. As much as the left gets up there, and we all saw, it wasn't Pelosi. Schumer was up there, and then Pocahontas was up there, talking about how outraged they were. And this, it's like, hey, do your job. Legislate. If there's that much support for it, legislate. Pass the law. Pass an amendment. Okay.
Yeah.
They can't, and they won't.
No, they absolutely wouldn't, because it goes back to your point about Roe v. Wade being decided on such bad constitutional law that they knew if they passed a law, it would be immediately challenged by the lower courts, and it would make its way to the Supreme Court, and they would lose. They know it, because they know what shaky ground that Roe v. Wade was decided on. And then again, in Casey and Planned Parenthood was viability. And that's one of the main reasons why they never passed a law, because they know this would have happened, 15 years ago rather than today, had they passed some law, saying it, because it would have been challenged in the courts much earlier, than it has been.
And this is a problem, that we face not just with abortion, but everything. Like when you look at immigration, and I'll tell you right now, the right and the Republicans are just as guilty of this. Hey, you want to change all this stuff? Pass a law. You're anti two-way, pass an amendment. Okay, you can't get the support for it, or you don't want to fight for the support for it. So that's telling in itself. I find nothing in the language or history of the Constitution to support the court's judgment. The court simply fashions and announces a new constitutional right for pregnant mothers, trying to throw that under the 14th Amendment. When you look at, another one of their major reasons, the majority opinion in Roe wrongly characterizes the common law of England regarding the status of abortion, because a lot of our laws obviously, came from the old ways in England, and how we interpret things and the verbiage and what they use. And this is a quote: life is the immediate gift of God, a right inherent by nature in every individual, and it begins in contemplation of law as soon as the infant is able to stir in the mother's womb. Viability. For if a woman is quick with child, and by a potion or otherwise killeth in her womb, this, though not murder, was by the ancient law homicide or manslaughter. But at present it is not looked upon in quite so atrocious a light, though it remains a very heinous misdemeanor. So basically saying, hey, once you kill that child that could theoretically survive on its own without the mother, you've committed murder. Another one, a privacy right, which Josh talked about to kick this thing off. A privacy right to decide to have an abortion has no foundation in the text or history of the Constitution. Hey, guess what? Find me the right of privacy, or the right to privacy in the Constitution. Okay. You talk about search and seizures and this and that under the Fourth Amendment. And there's a couple that we talked about before: enumerated rights and unenumerated rights. But it is the broad implication of the 14th Amendment, which takes us on to one of the biggest ones they talk about here. Although it reads the 14th Amendment extremely expansively to include a right of privacy to decide whether to abort a child, and this is where the hypocrisy steps in, the court in Roe adopts a very narrow construction of the meaning of persons to exclude unborn children. Now, the 14th Amendment and the Constitution, remember this, also applies to corporations. Even though corporations can't vote and there's other rights that corporations don't have, but they make the 14th Amendment so broad to cover, the right of privacy, but say, you know what, it's kind of broad, but it's not so broad over here to actually cover the unborn child. And going back to what I led off with on this, that's my major problem with this: is one, the constitutionality of it, but address the viability of the child. I mean, they don't even talk about it. They don't even address it. It's like, so you're ready to kill something that is, so then if you're able to do that, if you're able to kill a child that is, and I'm trying to leave the morality out of this. I'm just talking about basically, like biology, right? It's like you're taking a human being that can survive on its own and you're able to kill it, then why stop at birth? Where's the line at then? Okay, what's really different? Oh, because the individual was born, is that the line? Because we're even seeing that that's being pushed. We're hey, up to 30 minutes after, like we talked about. So again, this all goes back to uh, Congress failing to create a law, failing to bring forth an amendment. They can't get the support. But what I'll say, Josh, and I ask you this, what impact do you think that this is going to have on the midterms? Because initially I want to believe that, hey, this is what's going to light a fire up, because clearly what they're doing is gaslighting, conflating, again, taking the spotlight off the issues. He's been posting on Twitter all day where all of a sudden people are 10th Amendment fans, and all of a sudden now we can define what a woman is. And, all of a sudden, all these things that you couldn't do a couple of weeks ago, my body, my choice. Now we can all do this. Uh, do you think that people see through the smoke and mirrors when it comes election time, or do you think that this plays a pretty big role in getting some of the Democrats who maybe were going to sit at home, but maybe kind of light that fire under their asses to get out there and vote?
Absolutely. So the first thing is people need to ask why now? Why was that leaked now? Because when you go back and look at it, Alito's majority opinion was written at the beginning of February. All right, we are now a what a couple days into May, right? So why now? Was it just, did the leaker have it before now and just waited till today to release it, to coincide with 2,000 mules dropping about the 2020 election and the corruption, to coincide with the Pfizer document dump, that shows that the Pfizer vaccine you know, was it at the 95% efficacy rate that they claimed. Um, I don't know. There, you can conjecture about that, about that all day. Real quick, you talk about the privacy piece, right? Well, it's not just a woman's privacy with their doctor. That's patient, that's privileged information. That's no different than saying, well, I have a constitutional right or privacy with my doctor, for a vasectomy. That is nowhere in the Constitution of the United States that your vasectomy is constitutionally protected information. Um, you know that so that whole argument right there is absolutely it's absolutely ridiculous on the surface, and even after you dig into it. Um, and so I completely spaced your question, so I'm gonna need you to ask it again because I'm an idiot.
No, I was asking, the impact that it's going to have on the midterms, and you started
Oh
out
yeah,
with looking at
midterms.
the timing, right?
Yeah. So I think it's going to have a huge impact on the midterms. I think you had some people who are going to sit home. Those people are discussing with both sides. I think you're going to have some Democrats who have buyer's remorse, from 2020 for voting for Biden. Now that we are well into our way into, that transitory inflation, which is now permanent. Which oh, and also today was the day the Fed was supposed to meet and pump up the interest rate another 0.5%. So, again, timing. Why today? Why was it released? Always ask yourself, why was it? Why is today? Why is this happening right now? I think it is absolutely going to energize the left base, to get out to the polls, and it might have. I think you're obviously going to you're going to have those who are going to go to the polls anyway, regardless, and they were going to pull that lever, for a Democrat. But I do think you're going to energize some folks who may have had buyer's remorse and were, had decided to, they weren't going to vote Republican, but they were going to stay home. Um, but I mean, I think there's an opportunity here. Chaos is a ladder. Littlefinger said that on Game of Thrones, and he's absolutely correct. And there's mass chaos right now, and if the Republicans are smart, they could use this as a ladder. And the way they could use it as is to, if they would introduce, within the next couple of weeks, if the Republicans step forward and introduce some legislation to put some, possibly to put some parameters on abortion, but to show, hey, we're willing to meet halfway. Um, I don't think they'll do that because the GOP, kind of like, I ran it on them last episode. They're stupid. And they're going to, continuously snatch defeat from the jaws of victory time and time again. Um, I, I think the midterms are still going to be what the midterms were going to be, 2 days ago. uh, because much like everything else, this is probably going to stay in the news cycle a little bit longer than Ukraine is going to be in the news cycle a little bit longer,
Oh yeah.
than some other things. And I just real quick, I hope somebody reached out to Zelensky and let him know he's not the new thing yet anymore. Like, hey man, you're sorry, but you have been, right, you've been uh, pushed over to the trash heap of history because Americans are now on the next thing, which is Roe v. Wade being overturned. Um, but I think, let's see, it's May. I think by the end of June, this is going to fizzle, if not a little before then. And at the end of the day, people are still paying $4.20 at the pump. Prices are going to go up. People are not going to be able to buy houses or build houses here in the next couple of months because the interest rate's going to be so high. And I think the housing market's going to go down. We're going to hit, I think we're going to hit some very hard times. I think the Dow is going to take a hit, to the point to where it's going to be a significant emotional financial event for a lot of folks. And at the end of the day, people can care about Roe v. Wade, and people can care about this and that. And a lot of the folks that are screaming the loudest aren't people who are childbearing age anyway. And I think eventually, I think their pocketbooks are going to convince them, or they're at least going to tell them, hey, you know what? It's not like you're going to have a kid anyway. And oh, by the way, you're still paying $4.23, which is, I think, still the national average for gas right now. One of the things that I want to address, I'll throw it over to you here in a minute, is just some of the arguments that people are making on this, and you're not going to convince some of those on either side, what the true argument is. But if anybody is going to argue this thing with somebody, you have to argue it from a constitutional standpoint, right? The constitutionality of it. It doesn't matter, what your feelings are. Roe v. Wade, it didn't do good. It felt good, right? We talked about it before. Laws either do good or they feel good. Roe v. Wade was a feel good, for a lot of folks, but it didn't do good. You have to argue this on the merits of the constitutionality. You can get into the argument on the morality piece, but it's going to fizzle out because, again, you're arguing from a position of authority, and that person may not subscribe to the authority from which you're arguing. So, it is not laid out in the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment is very, very clear. And it goes back to Alito's, the verbiage in Alito's opinion was very, very clear. And I quote, "We thus return the power to the people and their elected representatives at the state level," right? They are sending this back to the states to decide. And, again, quote, "Roe was remarkably loose in its treatment of the constitutional test." And I saw you mentioned it. Some states are going to allow it, some states won't. Blah blah. So California, New Jersey, and New York, all the governors have come out and said that they will immediately. They've already got bills. They're in the hopper right now. That if Roe v. Wade is overturned, they will move to pass state level legislation authorizing abortions. In California, you mentioned they will pay $4,000 for folks to travel to California to get an abortion done and then travel home. The state will pay that. So again, hey, if the people still left in California want their tax dollars to go to pay for out-of-staters to come in and have a medical procedure done and leave, hey man, you voted for that in office, all for it. To me, I look at it, it's no different than, when I retired out of the military, looking at, okay, what states tax military retirement, what states don't tax military retirement, what states have more favorable gun laws, what states don't have favorable gun laws, right? So those are things that factored into where I want to live and where I'm willing to live is, those. So if I look at a state and, let's say, I'm in the boat, like I want to get all the abortions I can, I don't care, whatever, then you're more than welcome to move to a state where that is allowed. Marijuana, the same thing. There are states that, it's still, obviously a class one, or schedule one, drug, But there are states that they allow they allow recreational marijuana. Some states don't. So that's a decision you have to make. If you want to live in a state that allows abortion, and it has incredibly high taxes, incredibly high crime, and it's just a dark blue shithole, by all means go live there. If you are a New Yorker, if you are an out of stater in my home state of Florida, and you're trying to turn it into a Democratic shithole, and you don't like it because Ron DeSantis, currently the best governor in the United States, has said absolutely not. Abortions in the state of Florida will only be in the event of threat of life to the mother, or in limited cases of rape, which is going back to the original argument of Roe v. Wade. They were going to be safe and rare, right? They weren't going to be in the almost a million a year. That's not rare.
That goes back to the Clinton era, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that right there goes back to the Clinton, his whole, philosophy.
yeah. It was like, well, it's safe and rare. If there's a million of them, it's not safe or rare. That's like saying, there's a million bottles of, let's say, let's just say Pappy Van Winkle, bourbon out there. Okay, well, it's not rare if there's a million bottles, bro. I mean, it's just not rare. And so it's hard to, it's hard for them to make that argument when I think last year was 800,000 plus, abortions performed in the United States. One of the arguments I'm seeing that is this is going to, decimate, the GOP is intentionally doing this to decimate the Black community. 40%, as of last year, 40% of abortions were in the Black community. If the GOP wanted to decimate the Black community, they would be all for abortions to continue, and continue. So you think about a little over 800,000 abortions, 40% of those were from the Black community. So that would be, we'll say I'm bad at math because I'm a product of public schools, right? So let's say 300,000, right around in there. So if the GOP was really wanting, Black babies to be killed in the womb, they probably wouldn't be fighting to stop abortion. And when you look at, there's 42, approximately since Roe v. Wade, approximately 42 million females have been aborted in the womb. 42 million. Just think of, all of those women, like you said, all of a sudden people woke up and everybody had a biology and a law degree today. Everybody's a constitutional scholar and everybody can, say what a woman is. Even though, 2 weeks ago, you had to be a biologist to do that. So, anybody brings that argument up to you, you can crush that right quick and in a hurry. Um, you know, there's a couple more, arguments out there that are absolutely completely ridiculous. Again, Roger kind of spoke to it. People were like, well, the Supreme Court, I saw somebody today, they were arguing, and these are people who have significant followings, on social media. And I'm talking about significant followings in the hundreds of thousands, right? I'm not worried about a couple, somebody out there with 5 followers, giving their opinion because their sphere of influence isn't that big. However, you should never underestimate the power of stupid people in large numbers. So, but these are folks out there with with singular followings, and they talked about they're like, well, the Supreme Court, is going to pass a law, banning abortion, and these are it kills me because these are people who obviously almost all of them are college educated because they have it in their bio. They also have their pronouns in their bio, which I don't that tells you all you need to know as well. All right, so as we know, the Supreme Court does not pass laws. That would be the legislative branch. Okay. The Supreme Court determines the constitutionality of a law that is passed by the legislative branch. That is it. And the judicial system in its entirety is meant to be impartial and not subject to the whim of the people. Right. So all the people out there standing in front of the Supreme Court tonight and, screaming and shouting, they should not care less about what you have to say because you did not vote them into office, right? You did not vote them. If you are upset with the laws or the lack of laws, then you need to do an about face and you'll be facing the Capitol and Congress and you go yell at those people because those people are the ones that craft and pass laws. And in the Supreme Court, once it gets to, if it hits their desk, they decide upon its constitutionality. The Supreme Court did not go out looking for this argument. It was brought to them by the states, by the lower courts, because they could not get resolution at that level. So it's not something they went and they did not go and seek this fight. Um, so I just want to throw that out there for like the argument piece, and one, um, and I'll ask Roger this. I don't know if you've seen it, Roger, but I have not seen one, right, ultra conservative, ultra religious, never Trumper on social media today come out and thank President Trump and Mitch McConnell for this day. Because in my opinion, I will get your opinion on it, because without them, there would be no majority opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. And so does this kind of does this change? Does this kind of put a bow on, or how does this impact Trump's legacy as a president, given what we have right now and knowing that he is the one that put 3 Supreme Court justices on the bench?
Well, one, I think that if everybody noticed out there, Josh has not been the biggest fan of Mitch McConnell, and he actually gave him some credit. And where I think credit's due. Here's the thing: most people they're so short sighted that it'll just fly over their heads, and they don't realize it. And we talked about it a million times. Like, hey, the biggest, like, the legacy of Trump is going to be the federal justices or federal judges that he appointed, right? And Mitch McConnell was genius at that, because I tell you what, the Democrats were slow, because I think a lot of times, and this is, and I don't know if it's anecdotal, just my observation or whatever, but it seems Democrats overly are emotional, and they appeal to emotion. That's how they get the mob going, right? Let's not talk about facts. Let's not talk about the law. Uh, we're just going to try to get you fired up because we want pitchforks and we want torches and that's, you're not getting to the root of the issue. When you look at Mitch McConnell, he played the long game. He knew, hey, long after he's gone, long after Trump's gone, who he obviously had his own issues with, it's the federal judges that hang around, and those federal judges go on to become, Supreme Court justices, right? So I think that he had that foresight. He's a great politician. Like him, love him, hate him, whatever your issues are with Mitch McConnell, and I don't like everything he's done, but I think he is. He obviously doesn't appeal to a whole lot of the emotion. He doesn't bring that to the fight. He plays the long game. Hey, you're going to give up a couple battles here and there, but to win that war, ultimately you have to do it through the judicial branch when you have the majority to be able to influence that other branch of government. So I think he was smart about that. I think Democrats were Schumer got outplayed. I think they realize that now, which is why you hear him already talking about court packing if they maintain the majority, which in the midterms. Which, hey, newsflash, Schumer ain't gonna happen. He ain't gonna have the majority come November. I don't know that it'll be the big red tide and red wave, because again, we talked about before that the elections are local. You're not voting for Biden anymore. But I don't know that you had that red wave, but you're not going to have the majority. I mean, I would, if I was a betting man, and I am a betting man, they're not going to have the majority there. But that's why you hear about court packing, because they can't do it through, they can't do it through the normal political process, right? Or they can't do it through the normal legislative process, because you got outmaneuvered, you got outplayed. Which again, like him, love him, hate him, whatever. Mitch McConnell is a fantastic politician, and that's exactly what he is. When it comes, it's interesting when you talk about Trump. I know there's a little change from what we were talking about, and we'll pop back onto it real quick. I actually sent out a text the other day, because out here, man, he's having a big influence. He's having a huge impact on our elections. When you look at Mark Brnovich running, he's our current AG, and he's running against Mark Kelly. I think Brnovich had a commanding double-digit lead. And I don't even know the guy's name off the top of my head, but Trump basically, he kind of pooped on Brnovich. He didn't really give him his endorsement. He stopped just short of it, but came out in support of another individual. And now all of a sudden, Brnovich is like in fourth place. I mean, this happened overnight. So I'm kind of curious. I think what you're going to see across the country is that you're going to have these pockets, these deep red pockets, where Trump is going to have a significant influence. And then you're going to have those that he doesn't, because again, it's not a national election. It's a local one, and it's incumbent on the Republican Party to put forth people that are electable. They have to be personable, they have to be electable, they have to be able to relate and connect to their constituents. One thing I want to kick back to you, to start closing this thing out. One, I think you hit it on the head. I was going to ask you this, and then you said it. The leak came out too early, right? I think the leak came because weren't they saying that? If I remember correctly, they were saying this decision was probably going to come out in July or August anyway. So that to
Yeah,
me seems like a way better timeline than in May.
yeah, it was supposed to drop at the last week of June was when it was originally tentatively scheduled to drop. Which yeah, I agree with you. I think they jumped the shark on this one. They leaked it way too early.
Yeah, this thing hangs around for a couple months. What I would like to see though is the GOP, and you alluded to this as well. The GOP needs to get their messaging right on this, because right now all you're hearing is ban abortions, period. And I don't care what you read, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, Twitter, Facebook, that's all you're seeing. And the GOP needs to get ahead of this. And it's like, hey, we're not ban. I would almost go say, hey, you know what? States could choose to have abortions whatever time period, or outlaw it, ban it, legalize it, do whatever you want. We're pushing it back to the states. The GOP needs to get ahead of this. The Republicans need to get ahead of this, and maybe they do it locally. I'd be kind of curious to see what Arizona does, because we passed our own law, which is very similar to Texas and Mississippi. I think you're starting to see a lot of red states, jump on board. But I would like to see the Republican Party get ahead of this thing. One thing I think that we have not been clear on, which kind of goes to your point of the middle ground. I've never had, again, taking away the morality of this, a different argument that you can never win. Like, I've never had any issues when you talk about rape, incest, that type of stuff. Obviously, okay, that's just
Nope.
my opinion. I think for the conservatives, I think for most conservatives, and again, I'm just guessing here, but most of them probably feel the same. That, hey, look, if you were raped and you're carrying a child, um, again, I probably have an issue with, well, not probably, I do have an issue with you waiting till, week 38 to make that decision. But early on, you go into your first, second trimester or what have you. I obviously don't have any issues with that, but I haven't seen the Republicans come out to address that. I do want to get your take on this though before we close it out. What about the White House's messaging on this? So Psaki came out and spoke, Biden came out and spoke. And I tell you, I don't even have all the examples in front of me, but when you look at the CBP horsewhipping, right? You look at, Kyle Rittenhouse, and we've had all these cases. One, it seems like they're on the wrong side of every single one of these things. Whatever they do and come out and say, there's a ruling that says something different. But any other issue that's ongoing, any other issue that's being investigated, the Hunter Biden laptop and this and that. Oh, well, you know what? We don't speak to open investigations. Oh, but you'll jump all over this one, and then Biden comes right out and says, "Well, you know what? I haven't read the whole thing, but blah 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 blah." It's like, then why are you speaking to it? Like, you don't even know what you're talking about. It goes right back to the parental rights and education law and for Florida. They come out and they call it something else. They don't say gay. And it's like, you haven't even read it and you don't even know what you're talking about. But what's your thoughts on the White House, trying to get ahead of this thing? Do you think they're actually trying to get ahead of it? Or do you think they're just trying to continue pushing the Supreme Court's banned abortion narrative?
No, I absolutely think they're just trying. It's the latter. They're just trying to continue pushing the Supreme Court's, going to ban abortion. They're taking away your rights to health care. They're taking away, your right to life. And I even saw, so, Eric Swalwell, who is he is a complete douche canoe. He tweeted today that this was going to lead to the GOP taking away, your right to interracial marriage.
Oh,
Like, so,
Lord. Oh,
like,
Lord.
literally, like, an elected official tweeted that, and, a bunch of you saw a bunch of people jump on board, and they were like, "Yeah," like, they were gonna ban gay they were gonna ban gay marriage, they were gonna ban interracial marriage, like, it's a whole thing, and you're like, "How what?" It's just on a complete level of, just being disingenuous and, gaslighting, inflammatory, pick your favorite adjective. It's absolutely insane. Um but I think the White House is going to, they're going to continue that because they see, they see the ire, they see the, the opportunity right now to, to try and bake that in, to the populace, may try and make it last as long. We kind of talked about, I think they went about a month too early on it. Um, but whatever. One of the interesting things about this though is, the White House, they were very, very much against the, hacked materials and disinformation and stuff like that. And Twitter, wouldn't even post, of course, Twitter, famously, and it's really what led to, Elon Musk, buying Twitter, even though, people are like, well, the sale's not final. Well, yeah, you're right. It's not final, guy, but but it's in the works and it's happening. Um, they, Twitter came out, eventually and was like, yeah, we didn't want to, allow the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story because they claim, well, it was hacked. It was hacked material, right? It was like, well, no, it wasn't. And then it was like, well, it was leaked. It was like, no, it wasn't. But yet they allowed Sam Alito's leaked draft opinion piece to be shared all over social media today. It's all over Twitter. It's not been taken down. Politico hasn't been kicked off of Twitter because they shared leaked data. You know, and so that double standard is going, and it's kind of like it's kind of like you said, Rittenhouse, Smollett, Disney, Hunter Biden, school boards, TikTok, the Republicans, and TikTok, ivermectin, all that. Social media was very, very quick, and the White House was very, very quick to jump on board and push those narratives. With just, it was disgusting, how they did it. Zero dignity, zero class. One of the things that Biden did not address, this, in his speech, which kind of it surprised me, but it didn't surprise me all in the same breath, is that he did not address the fact that this was the first time something like this has ever been leaked out of the Supreme Court. He did not even come forward and say, look, we believe in Roe v. Wade. We believe it should be the law of the land, and, we're going to move forward to, enact legislation, to codify it, whatever. But we cannot have, draft opinions leaked out of any judiciary entity, out of the judicial branch, because, like you said at the beginning of this, that has to be an inner sanctum to where opinions can be, freely expressed, freely argued, debated, and kind of picked apart and stuff. So, those people who have been appointed to those positions can have free thought. It's like, it's like at a college, it's like censoring, free thought at a college. Like, that should be the melting pot of ideas, and where you can go and you can discuss things freely and not have to worry about, it getting plastered all over. Because at the end of the day, all this is a scare tactic. They are trying to get justices to, potentially sway them to change their mind. And I'll tell you, if it happens, that will be the end of the republic, when the judicial branch is now a political tool, just like, this legislative and the executive branch. That will truly be the end of the republic. One thing that Biden did say, and I don't know how many people caught it, but of course, he was, up there, and he gave his opinions. He was getting ready to get on a flight. I think he was going to Alabama to get behind and do some campaign rallies or whatever with the cup. But he said, and I quote, "The idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think that goes way overboard." So you got to kind of get the Bidenism out of the way. But I thought it was very, very interesting that he used the word child. He said judgment to choose to abort a child. It was like, oh, because I was under the impression, because I've been told, that was just a clump of cells. So even deep down, Joe Biden doesn't believe that it's just a clump of cells. He believes that it's a child. And, and a lot of folks on the left, I'm sure they do too, but that doesn't fit their argument, their narrative. Um, and kind of, I'll give you my final thoughts, and I'll kick it over to you for final thoughts. Like you said, a lot of people kind of figured out what a woman is and what a woman isn't today. Um, and one of the other interesting things that I found is, those people who do the identity politics, they're like, well, you're a man, so you shouldn't be able to have an opinion on abortion, right? And they're like, it's like, okay, all right, so let's play that game real quick. Let's how many female justices were on the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was passed? 0. They were all men. So men can have an opinion on abortion. How many women, frankly, were on the Supreme Court when the 19th Amendment was passed? How many men were in Congress when the 19th Amendment was passed? And for you guys, for those keeping score at home, obviously, 19th Amendment, women's suffrage, right to vote. How many men voted on that? All of them, because they were all men. There were no women. And the identity politics, to take it back a little bit further, let's take it back to the Civil War. If we're gonna play this game and say, well, white people, or men, can't, opine on this because they're not women, or white people can't opine on this because they're not black, where would we be right now if 500,000 white people from the North didn't go to war with the South to, preserve the Union and ultimately free the slaves? What if Abraham Lincoln had decided, well, I'm a white guy, I don't need to get involved in that because that's not my business. Or, well, I'm not a Southerner, right? You can even boil it down to that. Well, I'm not a Southerner, so it's none of my business. So the identity politics thing is very dangerous and it's very stupid. And people absolutely should not play that game. Because again, it just goes into what we've talked about, many times. You just go, people fracture along their tribal lines, more and more. And then we know what happens when, we're nothing but a group of, various tribes. Eventually you start warring with each other. And once you've, gone that tribal route, the judicial system is gone. And the legislative system is gone. The executive, system is gone. And then what does that leave us? That leaves us, to war with each other in a kinetic fashion, which is never good for anybody. So that's what I got to say on it. We'll get this, kick this thing out. I'll throw it over to you to give your final thoughts and close us out.
No, you're spot on, especially when you talk about the identity politics, because it's a false flag argument, right? It's fake logic is what it is. They don't have a good excuse. It's not grounded in anything. You're grasping for straws, so you have to have some logic to fall back on, so it makes you sound credible. So that's what they fall back on. But as Josh mentioned, I mean, do you really want that kind of society where, I guess what you're really saying is that, so I'm for segregation and different laws for different colors and people. I'm confused. Again, it goes back to the corporations. Are we for big corporations this week or not for big corporate? I guess it just depends on the week or the issue. And you touched on this, it's the whole ends justifying the means. It kind of brings up my final thoughts on this thing is, if the Democrats truly believe this, right? If they truly believe it was about women's rights, and if they truly believed that women were going to suffer, across the country, and they truly believe that, overturning this is unconstitutional, they would nuke the filibuster, right? They would nuke the filibuster, because if you're talking about human rights, if you're talking about human rights for blacks or women or men or whites or Asians or other minorities or what have you, at that point, yeah, you nuke the filibuster. Okay, looking at the whole, ends justifying the means. My guess is we don't see the nuclear option because they just don't feel that strongly about it. It's good rhetoric. They can get up there and Pocahontas can storm her way through some flowers and plants. I don't know what they did to her, and they can argue on TV and it's some good sound bites and some good talking points or whatever. but at the end of the day, they just won't go far enough to really say this was that important. I so believe in human rights that you're going to violate the rights of women across the country that I'm willing to do this. That's not going to happen. So I'll kick it back to you for your final thing so you can close out real quick. Just wanted to echo what Josh said earlier. One, I will say that Jeremy was a much better sergeant major than what I was or ever was going to be. I wish I could have been out there with the fellas. We were doing hosting a charity event out here with some Medal of Honor winners and some other veterans that served in combat throughout our nation's history. But so unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it out there to see everybody. Saw some of the pics Josh threw up there. They all look fantastic. But just let the folks back there know, hey, miss all you guys. Wish I could have made it there. Jeremy, Godspeed, and whatever you do next. I think he was talking about, some 5,000 acres that he's buying. He's going to kind of just go out and go off grid and chill. That's awesome, man. And God bless all those that are still back at the unit carrying on the mission daily. And I hope to hopefully see you guys. I'll see a lot of individuals that go back and forth, but hopefully, I think they were saying the next reunion was in 2 years or something like that. So I'll definitely do my best to make the next one in 2 years. So Josh, go ahead and close us out, buddy.
All right, yeah, we'll do. Hey, yeah, so I think about this, and I heard you say segregation, and it made me think. So one of the other big arguments that I heard today is that Roe v. Wade is settled law. It's a settled case, and we shouldn't be going back and overturning cases. So if you remember, I think it was like 2015, Obergefell v. Hodges overturned Baker and mandated that states will issue same-sex marriage licenses, right? And so if we're, people are now arguing, well, Roe v. Wade is settled law, it shouldn't be overturned. Okay, well, Obergefell overturned a previous case in your favor. And if you want to take back a step further and you start talking about, the segregation piece, okay, so should the Supreme Court who's like, well, Brown v. Board of Education, that's settled law. We can't go overturning, old cases. So, segregation is segregation, and we just gotta let it ride. That's just you talked about it, and that's that myopic, view that a lot of folks have, on this stuff. And it's like, hey, we learn things as we go forward. We go back and we look at laws and we say, okay, this was a feel good law, this was a do good law, and so things are going to get overturned, that weren't decided properly to begin with, and that's going back and correcting your mistakes. And that is truly a check and balance that appears to still be working, since the check and balances, within the legislative and executive branch are long gone, that the Supreme Court can go back and look and say, hey, we made a mistake in the past and we need to right that now. That is a fantastic check and balance when an entity can go back and correct, do that course correction on itself. So, all right, that's gonna do it for us. Hey, big thanks to Carlton Zeus for the intro music. Really appreciate you allowing us to do that. We keep telling Luke he needs to get off his ass and and get you on the show. So the listeners can meet the man behind the music. So, all right, folks, that's going to do it for us. You got opinions, you got questions, you got comments, throw them up on our social media. You know where to find us, all the platforms. And until we talk to you again, keep those canteen cups full of good whiskey and tightly secured.